And I'd just like to call up on Christina. So some of you may know Christina is a former councillor and mayor for the town of Golden. So she spent 12 years working as an elected official. And I think during that 12 years, she learned to become an asset management guru. So she's very passionate about this. And I think she has a lot of great insights to give you. And she learned a lot in her time as councillor and mayor. She made a few mistakes, which I think she'll share with you. But I think she has a really great message for you on the importance of asset management and the role that you can play. And just to let you know, tomorrow she's at our main fall conference speaking to our elected officials on their role in supporting you with asset management. So we're trying to support you at both ends. And so I'll just call upon Christina and welcome her up to the stage, or on the floor, maybe.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you. And thanks for coming out, you guys, to a session on asset management on a Tuesday afternoon. I really appreciate it. I have a superpower that I'm going to share with you. And my superpower is this, that I can turn any conversation into one about asset management. And I still have friends. So I haven't lost all my friends yet. So I am absolutely thrilled to be here, and I'm going to ignore the camera because they're going to be filming this session, but I would love it if it was interactive. So I'm really looking for your participation. And I know it's going to be filmed, but I want you to remember that you learn from one another. So your participation here helps everybody that's in the room, and it helps everybody to who's going to be watching the session. So it would be great. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I did 12 years as an elected official. I did 2 terms on council, and I did 2 terms as mayor. And when I was elected in 2002, nobody was talking about asset management. You know what we were talking about? New stuff. We were draining our reserves to take advantage of granting opportunities so we could build more things for our community. And I was one of those candidates that ran on a platform of, I want to know what the local government's doing with all the money I give them. I don't get it. And that we need more things for our community. And it did not take long getting behind the table, on the other side of the table, to realize that the services that local government provides are incredibly valuable. Everything from snow clearing to recreational services to water, sewer, roads, recycling. I don't have to tell you because you provide those services every day. And I became a real advocate for local government services, to the point where when I ran for mayor, our community got involved in a pilot project. So asset management started to come to the surface with PSAP 3150 being implemented. All of a sudden, we started talking about asset management, and our community participated in a pilot project in asset management, and I got right on board. I was super excited about it. While I was mayor, I also did a Master's of Arts in Leadership from Royal Roads, and I did my thesis on asset management and community engagement. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about that aspect of it, the importance of engaging your community. And I also took the NAMS training. Is anybody familiar with the NAMS training at all? No? Okay. I'm going to be showing you some of the NAMS tool, the National Asset Management Strategy tools. I'll be showing you some of those tools today, but I did take the NAMS training, so I'm familiar with the vernacular. And all of you are entrenched in the life and the work of local government. And obviously, as a politician, my job was not operations, right? It was not my job. It was the staff's job to operationalize council's direction. My job was to set policy. And so what I'm going to be talking to you about today mainly is about policy and the importance, your role in council's development of policy, the tools that are needed, and the information that's needed so that council can make really good decisions. So I just want to get a sense of who's in the room. I have been actually traveling around Nova Scotia quite a bit and speaking to your elected officials and some of your staff. I was in Bridgewater and Wolfville and Truro and up in Badek, and what a gorgeous province. I haven't been here as an adult in the Maritimes very much, but I grew up. I lived in Newfoundland for a couple of years when I was little, and I spent my summers out in Prince Edward Island as well. So my grandparents are from Prince Edward Island. So I've got some maritime ties, but I hadn't been back for a really long time. And what an absolutely gorgeous province! I was thrilled to be here. So it's been really fun meeting with your politicians and meeting with some of the staff, and I'm absolutely excited to be here. So. Like I said, I want to get a sense of who's in the room. Any CAOs? Okay, awesome. And finance? Okay, some. Recreation? All right, a few. Awesome. And public works? Great. And any frontline staff? Okay. And did I miss anybody? Oh, a politician. Who snuck in. Just so you know, I'm still going to be merciless. Did I miss anybody? Engineering. Awesome. Good. GIS, engineering, planning department. Anybody from the planning department? Good. Anybody? Did I miss anybody now? Yes, folks from the province. Excellent. So, welcome. Just wanted to get a good sense of who's in the room today. So what I'm going to be talking about today, a little bit, some of this. Now, it was interesting. I really appreciate the fact that many of you filled out the pre-session survey work. And so I got an idea of what some of your challenges are. And what was interesting is that everybody's in a really different place in terms of level of awareness and organizational cognizance, capacity, resources, and challenges. It was very, very diverse. And so hopefully in some of the working session that we're going to do later on, a lot of you'll be connecting with one another and be able to assist one another, because it is really about sharing resources and tools throughout the province so that you can do a better job of asset management. So I'm going to be talking, give you an overview. What is asset management? What isn't it? Why it's important, and we won't spend tons of time on that. How did we get into this position in the first place? And who needs to be involved? And then we're going to dive into the policy discussions. And that's really critical because the information that you provide to council to feed their policy discussions is absolutely critical to their decision-making process. So that's what we're going to do for the next couple hours. Sound okay? Awesome. All right, let's start with what. And I'm actually going to start off with what asset management is not, because here's some of the misinformation about what asset management is. And one of the things that, and I hear this from elected officials lots of times, it's like, well, that's staff's job. They're doing asset management. They're managing the assets. And the reality is, your elected officials, they control the strategic direction, they control the resources and the budget, they control policy, and they control level of service. I mean, obviously, you've got a legislated level of service, but you've also got a certain level of service that council has control over. So for example, obviously, if you've got a snow clearing policy that council has approved, a certain amount of snow falls and it's cleared, there's a policy that lays out when it's cleared. In Golden, where I'm from, where I was mayor, we had, you would think that you didn't even know the snow fell, right? You wake up in the morning and the snow was gone. And we even had a policy that we would clean seniors' driveways. And so we had like super rock star snow clearing services because of the policy that we had, right? So we had a Cadillac level of service in one area. So council can control that level of service, right? If it's not legislated. So it's important to understand that it's not just staff's job, it's also council's job. And it's also, it's actually we're all in it together. We have an infrastructure deficit right across this country where a third of our existing municipal infrastructure is in poor to very poor condition. So this isn't just your problem. This is everybody's problem, right? Local government delivers services that are very infrastructure intensive, right? If you think about all the publicly owned facilities in your community, most of them are owned by and operated by the local government, correct? Yeah. So it's an infrastructure intensive, they're infrastructure intensive services. And so it's everybody's problem. So it's not just staff's job. It's also not just a consultant's job. And this is sometimes what I will hear from staff is that, well, we're just going to hire a consultant, and they're going to take all of our data and information, and they're just going to collate it and give it to us. And you have to remember that the people, I mean, again, I don't need to tell you, especially public works and engineering and recreation, all of you know that the infrastructure that you deal with every day, you know it intimately. And I know that in our community in Golden, all of the information was in Public Works Dave's head. And one of our challenges as a community was, how do we get it out of Dave's head and onto the computer, right? And onto to the digital, in a digital format. How do we get it out into the GIS map? Because he knew when the pipes were laid, he was there when the pipes were laid and the roads were built, and he knew when all the infrastructure, what it was made of and where it was located, and how do you get it out of his head and get it on paper, right? And so it's not just a consultant's job. You can't hand that over to a consultant to write you a report. It's a co-created relationship. You want to be working with your consultants, but it's important that it's not just your consultants. It is not a fad or a box to tick. It's not going away. And how many times, like when the whole asset management conversation started, did some of you not think to yourself, oh, great, here we go again. It's like the sustainability plan. I got to get a consultant and get a sustainability, get them to write me a sustainability plan and make the province happy. And it's not going away. It's actually the way local government needs to be doing business. It just needs to be a way of life. Like you manage your health, like you manage your households, the way you manage your family, it's the same. It's actually the same principles, right? So it's not going away, and it's not going to end anytime soon. It's also not a project or a plan. It's not a plan that's going to sit on a shelf. And again, I think there's some misinformation that, well, we have to do this, we have to satisfy some kind of requirement, so let's just get a plan and make everybody happy. And interestingly enough, if you talk to the folks in Ontario, that is one of the things that they will tell you, that they made a mistake in the province. They'll say that we didn't have that organizational-wide cognizance around asset management and organizational awareness, and we didn't build up the education of our staff, and we made it a plan and a project instead of a process, right? The other thing is, it is not a software program. So in my former life, a long time ago, in my early 20s, I used to teach fitness classes when I was in university. And people would always ask me, what's the best exercise equipment to buy? And my answer would always be, the exercise equipment that you'll use, right? So there's lots of software programs out there. I'm not going to make any recommendations. Heck, I don't know. There's all sorts of software programs out there. And one of the dangers is that you can think we just have to have the right software program. And it's the program, there's all sorts of options, and it's the program that you'll use and that's going to provide you with the information that you need. It's also not the tangible capital asset accounting requirement, right? That's about historical cost and amortization. That's really satisfying the PSAP 3150, which is an accounting an accounting requirement, right? And it's also not just about collecting data. And I know that there's communities that the staff get buried in the data. And one of the things that I do when I'm working with communities when I go into a community and I work on their policy development, I'll meet with the staff first and I'll say, well, what is one of your challenges? Well, we've got all this data, right? We're buried in data, and it's not useful, or it's too much. So you want to make a point of your data is meant to serve you. And you get to the point where you've got, if you have too much data and you're not using that data, then you're actually wasting your resources. So it's not just about data collection. And it's not just about calculating overwhelming infrastructure deficits, right? And it can feel like it a little bit. I know that when in Golden, when we did the pilot project and we saw that our infrastructure deficit was growing by $2.4 million a year, it was like, oh my gosh, we're in so much trouble, and it's just overwhelming. You want to have the asset management process allows you to look in the rear view mirror and look at what's gone on in the past, but what it does is it allows you to focus on the future. So that's what asset management is not. Any comments about that? Does that land, or you're thinking, well, I disagree with you, because I'm happy to. You won't scare me. So really, asset management, it's an iterative process, and it really is a decision support system that involves everybody. It involves absolutely everybody in the organization. And oftentimes, I loved this picture because sometimes the staff can feel like they're the ones bailing, trying to get rid of the water, and some of the staff are down at one end and some of the staff are down at the other. But we're all in this together. If we have these infrastructure, if we're dealing with this huge infrastructure backlog right across the country, then it is everyone's problem throughout the whole community. So like I said, the asset management process, it gives you the information and the data to make informed decisions. Because council controls the priorities, right? They end up controlling where you're going to put your resources and priorities. So you want your elected officials to be making decisions about priorities based on empirical evidence. And so that's what the asset management process does. It allows you to to gather that information and collate it with rigor and structure so that it feeds into the decision-making process. And it needs to be reflected in all of your planning, and we're going to be talking about that later. It needs to be entrenched in policy. How many of you have an asset management policy? Okay, so not very many of you. I think that that's really, it's really interesting. It's really, really telling because policy is how elected officials provide direction to staff, right? And so in the absence of policy, you as staff are forced to make decisions in the absence of clear direction. And what policy does, of course, is it provides you clear direction, and it doesn't allow future councils to undo what has been done. It's more difficult to, of course you can undo policy, but it allows, it makes it a norm, and it brings it up. And like I said, it provides clear direction. And I'm often surprised, and I'll tell you a little interesting conversation that I had when we were working in one of the communities. We were talking about the amount of time on the agenda that is spent talking about policy. And one person said, yeah, we spend about 5 to 10% of our time talking about policy. I'm like, well, what do you talk about the rest of the time? Because what does politician mean? It doesn't mean scumbag. What does it mean? Come on, you guys. It means policymaker, right? And so 90% of council's job should be setting policy, right? And I'll just give you an example. So lots of times what I do, when I'm going into a community and I do strategic planning, and I've actually really changed the way I do strategic planning now. I've totally approached it differently. I will not do strategic planning in a community with a council until they've had a fulsome discussion about asset management and a fulsome discussion about roles and responsibilities. What's the role of staff? What's the role of council, right? Council's job is to set policy. The CAO's job is to translate that policy, and staff's job to staff, and staff's job is to operationalize that policy. That's where you get your direction from. And I'm amazed at the number of communities where that's not happening. Things are kind of happening haphazardly and accidentally, and they shouldn't. Because when staff is doing their job, and they're in their operational lane, and council's in their policy lane, it works like a sweet machine. When staff is forced to veer into policy, and councils are accidentally or intentionally veer into the operations, that's when things get messy, and you get that tension that exists. So it needs to be entrenched in policy so that staff have direction. And one of the entrenched in policy, I would also suggest that you have an expiry date on your policy. I know what I was going to say now. I just about got lost for a sec. So when I go in to do strategic planning, I will meet with the staff ahead of time, and I'll meet with each department and say, okay, give me 3 policies. First, I'll ask, what kind of direction do you need from council? Are you operating in the absence of policy? And I am shocked at the number of communities where their zoning bylaws outdated, they can list off a series of bylaws that are completely outdated, and staff, the legislative environment has changed, and staff is still operating in that with an old policy, and they're frustrated. And you're actually putting yourself at risk if you don't bring that policy, those needed policy changes to staff. So one of the things I ask is, okay, what are the top 3 policies that would help your department immensely and make your life easier and provide clearer direction for you? And they have no problem listing the policy directions that need to be had. So it's not like it's not like in a council meeting, well, there's no policies that need to be updated, so we don't know what to do with our time, so let's talk about the color of the bench. Or if we're going to give away a free, if we're going to let some user group have a facility for free, which we all know is not for free, right? And so it ends up consuming time on an agenda, things that are outside of council's roles and responsibilities. So it's really important to make sure that the asset management process, and we're going to go into all the policies that you need in your organization, it's really important that it be absolutely entrenched in policy. And then it has to be embedded into corporate behavior. And I'll kind of be talking about that really quickly. The importance of embedding it into the organization. So asset management is just a way that you do business. Right from your, regardless of the department, everybody knows what asset management is and the difference that it makes. So for example, your frontline staff. If council makes a policy decision to go to full cost accounting on utilities, for example, who has to wear that? It's your frontline staff, right? They're the ones at the front door. They're the ones, people are coming in. Someone's coming to pay their bill. And if they don't understand the rationale behind going to full cost accounting when it comes to utilities, then guess what? They're going to, I don't know, council, that's the decision that council made. But if they get it, then they can, I mean, you don't want your staff having to defend council's decision. You don't want to be putting them into that position. But they should have a fulsome understanding, because guess what? Most of us are from relatively small communities, 10,000, 5,000, right? 10,000 and less. Your frontline staff know people, and they talk to people. And if they understand why council's going to full cost accounting, they can defend that rationale to their friends in the grocery store when they come and complain to them. Because guess what? They do. I know as a politician, I'd walk through the grocery store and I had to plan for a good hour, right? But you know what? The staff was no different. Our staff had the same thing. Living in a small community, our staff had to, you'd walk through you'd go through the grocery store, go to a restaurant. The staff get the same kind of questions. They get poked at, right? You can't go anywhere without having to somebody ask you about what's going on in the town, or complaining about potholes, even though you have no idea. You're in planning. You don't know about potholes, right? You have to defend that. And so that's why that organizational corporate behavior, this understanding that this is what we're embarking on, and this is why it matters. So the other purpose of asset management is, what are the services that you need? What are you prepared to do without? Right? Because council gets to prioritize. What are you prepared to do without if you're not willing to pay more? What risks are you willing to accept? And what are you willing to pay for? Because that's the question that really it comes down to. You can have anything you want if you're willing to pay for it. Anything you want if you want to pay for it, right? Yes, you can have a pool, you can have a pony, you can have a trip to Disneyland. You can have anything you want if you're willing to pay for it. And what asset management does is it links the level of service with the cost of providing that service, and that linkage is absolutely important. But it also allows you to have a discussion about what risks you're willing to accept. And one thing I always say to I always say to elected officials, the job of the staff is to be risk averse. That is their job. They owe protection to the corporation above anything else. That's what they have to do. And the job of the politician is to decide the level of risk that they're willing to assume. And so your job is to provide them with what the implications are. Yes, we can do this, and these, like, in terms of their decisions, these are the options, and these are the consequences. And this is what we would recommend, but these are the consequences. And these are the risks that you have to be willing to assume. But staff's job is to be risk averse. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to protect the corporation, right? Yeah? So again, the asset, putting some rigor and structure around asset management really is about, if you don't want to pay more, then what are you willing to give up? And if we don't work together regionally, what are we at risk of losing? Because I know, and I'm hearing this I hear this right across the country. So you're not unique, just so you know, that folks are having to look at, okay, you go from, you've got one community that has an arena 20 minutes down the road, you've got another community that has arena, and then you've got this sort of all these services, everything's falling apart, and everybody's going, we can't continue along this trajectory. So you have to ask yourself, how do we work together to maintain the lifestyle that we have and to maintain the services that we have? And so I'll tell you a little bit of a story about what's happening in Golden right now. And I'm no longer the mayor, but I pay attention to what's going on, although I'm not home very often. So right now we have, we've done all of our inventory and our condition assessments, and we have a couple facilities that are owned by the municipality. Now, the language is different. A municipality here, when I use the term municipality, I'm talking about the town, and regional district is what you call the municipality. And it was interesting because my first workshop I did, I was like totally confused around the language. But so the regional district is what you would call the municipality. So the town owns, we're very asset rich and cash poor. We have a number of facilities that are strictly owned by the municipality. But it provides services to double the population. So we serve, we've got about 5,000 in our community, and we serve around 10 in the outlying areas. But our tax draw is from the 5. So what we're looking at now as a community is, well, the municipality has all these services, but cost recovery is only coming from user fees, but the taxation, it's offset by taxation only from the town. And so what we're looking at now is finding ways to either do some cost sharing or to look at tiered user fees, or possibly even losing certain services. That's part of the conversation. So for example, we have a municipal airport, and it is owned by the municipality, and it needs $5 million worth of work. It has 5 to 7 years left, and we have decided that we're not doing anything with it as a municipality. And we made that decision years ago when I was mayor. It was like, you know what? There's no business case here to maintain this. So we've communicated to the community that we're actually going to allow the airport to deteriorate. That's what we've decided to do, and you get to do that. We're not going to provide that service. Come 5 to 7 years, we're no longer going to be providing that service, right? So it really is the purpose of being able to have your collated data and your information is to be able to decide what do you want to pay for? If you don't want to pay for it, what are you willing to give up? And then what are we at risk of losing? Because that's really the key conversation in terms of throughout the community. So asset management gives you the empirical evidence to do the right thing, to the right asset, at the right time. And that's the credible Hulk there. Because you've got to have the empirical evidence. You have to have the rationale behind the decision making. And then council gets to assume what risk they're willing to assume. So again, this is no surprise to you. What assets do you own and where are they? How many of you have an inventory of all your assets? Okay. Some of you do. Excellent. So one of the things, and I have been saying this to elected officials, ask your staff, do we have an inventory of all our assets? And if we don't, do we have an inventory of our critical assets? Water, sewer, roads, storm drain management, right? The storm drains. Do we have those critical assets? And if you don't, if the staff, if they say, no, we don't have that inventory, then your job is to say, what will it take? What do you need to get into a position to answer that question? Because that's the first order of business. What do we have? And then where is it? And like I said before, if it's in Public Works Dave's head, it is only useful as long as Dave doesn't win the lottery and take off tomorrow, right? So if Dave knows where it is and it's not captured, then you're in trouble, right? So what assets do you own and where is it? What condition are they in? Because that's the next step. What condition are they in and what's the expected life? I was telling some of the folks that in recreation that I'm working in a community up in the Yukon, and they have a pool that will be closed next year because based on the condition assessment, it is too risky, and they are closing that pool, and that's all there is to it. And so in some ways, it's created a crisis for the community because they're like, well, how did this happen, right? And it's kind of like, well, 3-year mandates, 4-year mandates, 100-year-old infrastructure, they don't mesh very well. So then, asset management is about what service and asset risks need to be prioritized and managed, right? It helps you identify what those risks are. And you want to be able to capture, you want to be able to get like a preliminary infrastructure report. Don't get buried in the data, but make sure that you have a preliminary infrastructure report that focuses on age and risk. And then once you've identified high-risk areas, then you go, okay, I need more information on this. So if you start with the age and the risk, then you say, okay, I need to find a way to get more information. And that's how you avoid being buried in the data. And then, of course, how much is it, what needs to be done, and when does it need to be done by, and how much will it cost? And here's another key question. What assets can and should be retired? I've decided to change the name, or actually, this was a suggestion the other day, change the name of asset management to lust to dust, right? This is what we lust for, and this is, so life cycle. The second you think about it, you start lusting. Yes, I want a pool, and then what's it going to take till it goes to dust? And that's what's happening in the community of the Yukon, right? They're actually, so it was lusted for a long time ago, and now it's going to be dust next year, right? So it changed the level of service. So that is an important question, and we'll be talking about that because one of staff's jobs, and council should be asking for this, is, hey, what are our low-value assets that we can retire? Are there things that it doesn't make sense to have anymore? I told you that we were a community that was asset-rich and cash-poor. And one of our facilities, when we looked at it was the Civic Center, and we decided, you know what? It's the end of its useful life, and we're going to tear it down. And the community basically was like, you can't do that. We can't lose this asset. And so part of our communication was strategy, if you don't want to lose this, this is what it's going to cost. And this is the level of effort that's required. And we end up renewing that facility, and now we have this beautiful arts and cultural facility. But we also have assets and services that we have retired. One of them being, I don't know how this happened, but we ended up with like a housing facility for our local college. We were like, you know, when we did our asset management inventory, it's like, why do we have this? This doesn't make one speck of sense. And it actually took a huge level of effort to kind of turn it back over to the college, but we did. And some of you will have heard this story before, but I am going to tell it again for those of you who haven't. And that is we did have a bus service that we provided bus service to our residents. And when it came up to renew it came up to renew the agreement, renew the contract, we were going to have to invest quite a bit more into a new fleet. And council decided that when we looked at it, it was like, you know what? We have the worst performing transit system in the province. There are 5 people that ride our bus, and it doesn't make one speck of sense. It is overly subsidized, right? And so we actually decided to cancel our bus service. And it seemed like a no-brainer. Now, that being said, and I have said that, again, some of you have heard this story before, but that being said, if you're going to make a change to a level of service, communicate the rationale first. Because guess what? I ended up with a 600, in my council chamber full of people who didn't even know we had a bus service before, and they all signed the petition, and there was a lot of very, very angry and upset people because we failed to communicate. Now, that was one of those lessons, that's one of those mistakes. So once I learned that lesson, we strategized on our communications a little better. But when I talked to people and said, are you willing to subsidize this service to the tune, like, are you willing to pay $50 more on your taxes to subsidize this service? They're like, no, I guess that doesn't make sense, right? When you talk to people, they understand the rationale. And if we would have shared, this is a difficult decision that we have to make, because guess what? It was really tough because it is 5 people in our community that are marginalized, and those are the people that are affected. So the humanity was not lost on me. And as mayor, you end up driving people around for a bit because that's what you do in a small town, right? So again, I think it's important to remember that asset management really is an iterative process. It's not going away. You don't do it once. It is ongoing. It's like I said about the exercise program, right? Okay. So why? It's because we can't afford to ignore this issue anymore. We are in a very difficult position. All of you have probably a pretty good idea of the state of your infrastructure. And can anyone say that the cost to provide infrastructure, the cost to provide infrastructure into the future has been accounted for, and you've got service levels that are reflective of your current fiscal capacity? Anybody? No, probably not. Because we're not doing it, right? And we can't afford to find this boring. We can't afford to ignore it. We have to do something about it. And the public has to stop pretending that there's no cost to providing service. And one of the things that I think is really important, because I hear this all the time, is staff get into a bit of a spin cycle. They're, oh my gosh, I can't tell council what's really going on because they'll freak out. It's too overwhelming. And that's your job, is to actually share your infrastructure burden with your elected officials, because they need the information so that they can make strategic decisions. Because we're risking our economic future and our financial future and our social future. Like that community that's losing their pool, they're losing a critical piece of infrastructure that their community loves to use. And now it's lost because they didn't do regular maintenance on an ongoing basis, and partly because that wasn't communicated in a fulsome way, in a way where council could decide, yes, they were willing to take the risk and let the facility close, Or no, we're going to increase taxes, we're going to increase user fees so that we can actually continue to provide this service long-term into the future, right? So your job is to share the story with council. Stop protecting them. And I hear this all the time. Sometimes when I go work in a community, I will watch council meetings on TV before I go in, just to kind of get a flavor of what's going on. And I will watch elected officials look to staff and go, well, what would you do? It is not staff's job to take a political role. Your job is to be apolitical and provide council with, here are the options, here are the consequences, and let council decide, right? They get to decide. They get to make those strategic decisions and decide the level of risk. So stay in your lane, right? And when it comes to the data, complexity is the enemy of execution. So make sure that your data is used to paint a picture and tell a story so that council can use that information as a decision-making tool. Because otherwise, you need your elected officials on board. They need to understand, because otherwise, it'll be a wild goose chase, right? And I see this all the time, and I saw us do this around the council table. We would have a strategic plan, and we'd have strategic priorities, and staff would have a work plan, and then all of a sudden, something would happen, and there'd be a new emerging issue, and all of a sudden, we were redirecting all of our resources somewhere else. We weren't adding to resources so that we could continue with the strategic plan. We were actually moving resources away from what needed to happen. And again, I see this all the time, and sometimes it can be really, really little things, like writing a letter or doing a bunch of research on a topic. And I'll tell you another quick little story here. I was at the regional district table, and we had a presentation from 3 doctors and a researcher on the danger of GMOs. And they did a very compelling presentation. And what they wanted us to do as a regional district was to pass a policy that said that we would be a GMO-free area. They did this presentation, simple little policy, here we just need you to pass this, and I was like, and I had been entrenched in the asset management world and policy long enough. I was like, wait a second, this is a compelling presentation, and nobody cares more about health than I do. I said, I bet around this table. I was on a roll. I said, but if we pass this policy, and we give the impression that we can actually control GMOs and control the use of GMOs, we're taking away resources, and there's no way I can support this. And I said, on Move for Information, and it was interesting because it was seconded, boom, and it was over. And I had a couple directors come to me after and go, oh my gosh, thank goodness you did that, because we were about to go down a road, right, that seemed like, the right thing to do. Because you have to understand what it's like to be an elected official and walk down the street every day. People are coming at you. I would say 90% of the things that people came and talked to me about as an elected official had nothing to do with water, sewer, roads, land use planning, recreation. 90% had nothing to do. It was about poverty reduction. It was about GMOs. It was about energy costs. It was about isolation. It was about economic development. It was about smart meters. And I see you guys are going to go into this, and this may not impact you, but around BC, when BC Hydro introduced smart meters, it was a big deal, and we had our council rooms filled with delegations on something that we had nothing to do, that we had no impact on whatsoever. That wasn't our job, right? And that's what it's like to be an elected official. You're inundated every day, not with the basic stuff, not with your job, but with all of the other things that overwhelm your community. And all of these critical critical issues that your community faces. So as much as I'm, being a smart aleck and making fun of politicians, it's the wild goose chase really is about things that people come to and talk to you about that that they care deeply about. So it's kind of like this for your community. It's a little bit of magic, okay?
Dave, did you say you were going to make dinner? I couldn't remember.
What? I just wish you'd take some initiative and cook your own dinner for once. I've been at work too, and now I get to come home and pack the dishwasher and then unpack the dishwasher and cook dinner and put the washing on, and you know what? I can't continue to live like this because it's not me.
Hey, relax. It's going to be all right.
How?
Here, I'll just show you.
Okay, I've been doing this since we moved in.
See this basket thing? I don't know how it happens, if it's the house or what, but any dirty clothes you put in this basket, somehow the next day
They're just clean, folded, and in a perfect pile on your bed.
You're not serious.
I couldn't believe it at first either, but it just keeps happening.
That's why I didn't tell you. I didn't want to jinx it.
You are insane.
Try it, you'll see.
Unless it's only chosen me. See, I don't know.
I can't do this.
No, wait. There's other things too.
Plates, cutlery, pizza boxes, dirty tissues, anything you leave on this coffee table just vanishes overnight. I mean, sometimes I'll see how far I can push this thing and I'll just leave shit everywhere. And then sure enough, the next day, it's all gone. It's just vanished. It's magic. No, she wouldn't have left me. This is what I think happened. I heard her get up in the middle of the night to get a drink or something. She must have fallen onto the magic coffee table and just vanished.
Are you insane?
No, he's not insane. I've got the same coffee table at home.
So I love that video. I found that video on Facebook, and I loved it because it was like, oh my gosh, that's a perfect way to talk about asset management, right? It's a perfect way to talk about local government services because nobody has to think about them, right? You drive down your road and you walk on the sidewalks and there's beautiful flowers planted and trees and signage and trails and water and sewer and recreational services. Like, local government provides this broad range of services that live largely under the radar. And most people don't think about it. And really, why should they, right? Why should they think about it? Because it's just provided to them. The challenge is when we've got all of this built environment that is falling apart. So, did anybody catch what's happening in a small community in Alberta? Okay, so I was listening to CBC, and the only one I could find was the Calgary one. I was listening to it 2 days ago. And they had a water main break, and nobody had water for 2 days. Nobody in the community had water for 2 days, right? It sounds crazy, but it's something you never think about, right? And all of a sudden, the risk is real. Because now, something that you never think about on a regular basis suddenly is a big deal. How many of you had the power go out before? You ever had the power go out? So what happens? It's kind of annoying and it's a little bit frustrating. And then when the power finally goes back on, you're like, yay, the power came back on. And then you stop thinking about it. Like, you don't have to, right? You shouldn't have to, and you shouldn't have to think about it. It just is there. And that's the way local government services are. They exist under the radar. It's magic. But there's a cost to the magic. And your job as staff is to share that burden and the cost of the magic. If you like it this way, how do we keep it this way, right? So, All right, so when I asked you guys some of what your pain point and what some of your challenges were, some of you said organizational buy-in and organizational communication. That was a huge thing, and it came up a couple times. Software programs, the need for software programs, and but also a big one, and it came up over and over again, resources and internal capacity. That was a huge thing, right? Is how do we get the internal resources? And also records management. The importance of having, like I said, having the software, having the data. And all of those things are really key to feeding into the asset management process. And what I highly suggest that you engage your council in, these are the resources that we need in order to get you this information. Because if it's not, it's kind of like the magic coffee table. If it's not on the radar, they're not thinking about it. It's your job to elevate it and make it a topic of conversation. All right, so what happened? One of my favorite sayings, how do you go bankrupt? Gradually, and then suddenly, right? And we got here because, for the most part, we have focused highly on capital costs and not on those operational costs and maintenance costs and then replacement costs, right? And we've made decisions that haven't taken full life cycle cost accounting into our additional infrastructure. And so I told you when I was first elected as council, we were taking advantage of all these granting opportunities, and we were building more trails, we were building signage, we were we were building new stuff. And we did two things. We didn't add to our staff capacity. All of these extra things that we had, we didn't add to our staff capacity. And we did not take full life cycle cost accounting into that. So one of the things that your policies should say is not only you adhere to asset management principles, but it should say that you take full life cycle cost accounting into all your decision making. So that it's a deliberate decision. You can take on a new service or you can build something new, but you do it with your eyes wide open, right? And it's really important. If that's embedded in policy, then staff is obliged to come to council with, yes, we can build this new facility, and this is what it's going to cost, right? You can do that. Failing to fully recover costs and fees. We've been moving as a community. How many of you, your utilities are full cost accounting? Your water and sewer? Some, yeah, okay, excellent. So less than half of the room, but it's something that you, like I said, you should be moving towards, that full cost accounting on water and sewer. And again, your job is to provide council the information so that as you move towards full cost accounting, that your frontline staff and your elected officials have the information so that they can provide a rationale to the public. Because guess what? When I was mayor, I had people come into my office. How come the cost of water is going up so much? Water and sewer and one of the things I would, I actually made some videos saying, you know what? For the cost of a grande latte a day, you're getting enough water to wash your clothes, your dishes, to drink, to shower. Some people were even washing their driveway, right? So again, asking people what's important to you. How much do you value water, and what are you willing to pay? How important is it to you? And so you can, if council has that information, they can provide the rationale for that. So it's been that historical short-term thinking, and it's also been reactive. It's been reactive thinking. And again, you can decide to do that. You can wait till something fails, as long as you're doing it deliberately. If you're doing it in the absence of good information and everything accidentally fails, kind of like that community in Alberta, where they had a service failure, they had no intention of having that service failure, right? That wasn't something they intended. But if you're proactive, it'll save you money in the long run. And you don't wait till an asset fails. You make sure that you're doing that ongoing maintenance so that you can extend the life of the infrastructure. And if you can justify that, we're going to extend the life of the infrastructure, and this is going to save you more money in the future. One of the communities that I worked in, a small coastal community, tiny little community, the council of the day 10 years ago decided they want to get into the energy provision business. So they put a geothermal system in, like an energy system, a geothermal system in, and they're relatively low maintenance. They didn't add additional staff capacity, and it just kind of, everybody sort of forgot about it. It was providing this service to their community. So when, in the middle of the coldest winter, and this is a true story, they had a failure, and they had a service disruption. All of a sudden, guess who's getting blamed? Staff, right? So there weren't the staff resources and capacity within the organization because they didn't look at full life cycle cost accounting in that service provision. So then, what's the word on the street? Staff's asleep at the wheel, right? And it's important to remember that this is a failure on a number of levels. And if we're going to change this way of doing business, you have to look at full life cycle cost accounting in any new infrastructure and any new service. It has to be embedded into your policy. Because it doesn't make headlines, right? Like I said, it's not very sexy. It's kind of boring. But we can't afford to find it boring. And it doesn't make headlines until it becomes a catastrophic problem. So oftentimes I will hear people say, well, government should run like a business. And the reality is government provides services that it doesn't make sense to run like a business, right? Nobody would run a public pool or an arena, right? Or water system, or have nice sidewalks and trees and stuff like that. It's that overall common provision of service that everybody contributes to. And so I'm actually going to jump through these slides really quickly and get into the policy part, the policy discussions that you need to be having. But I want to get into some of those group discussions as well around the table. But you can have a copy of my slides if you give me your card, or I'm happy to send you a copy of the slides. So like I said, this just kind of outlines what's the role of staff in asset management, right? Each department, what their role is, and I just, it's funny because the planning department, right? What does council often say? We want things to go faster, and we want economic development. So what do we want to do? We want to reduce the cost. You have to take, and if we get new infrastructure, maybe that'll pay for the old infrastructure. And there's something called that the BC government has developed, and that's the infrastructure costing tool. It's a very useful tool if you're in the planning department, and it helps you to communicate with council that adding new infrastructure and assets there's a cost associated to it, right? If you add X number of kilometers of streets, then guess what? It's going to cost you more. It doesn't pay for itself. And it's important to understand that. And I'm going to talk about the recreation department a little bit, because one of the challenges about recreation is near and dear to people's hearts, and local government provides that service as it's one of those wonderful services that makes communities a great place to live, right? The recreational facilities and the recreational services. But there is nothing more of a hot button item than recreation, right? I know in our community that that when user groups, any changes to the schedule, any changes to fee structures, any changes to their ability to use the facilities, then they were always coming to council with, can we use this, can we use this facility for free? We've got this event. And council can do that. They can say, yes, you may have this facility at no cost to you, but if you embed it in policy, then you can say to council, this is what it's going to cost the municipality, the local government. I have to watch my terminology. This is what it's going to cost the local government to provide this service. And that can be embedded into policy. Council can discuss, yes, we'll let you have this for no cost to you, but there is a cost to us. Nothing is for free, right? Right? Those of you who operate recreational facilities, you're always on the hook, and people don't like to pay for recreation. And it is important to make sure that the frontline staff knows what's going on. Okay? Do not question authority. They don't know either. Isn't that the truth? And of course, senior management has to keep all the balls in the air. So the role of the elected official really is that stewardship responsibility for the long-term maintenance of the built environment and a legislative environment that allows your community to thrive. And one of the frustrating things, and I alluded to this earlier, is that councils, oftentimes they get elected and they want to do something. And you're not actually elected to do anything. You want to, it's like you want to physically do something, but your job is to think and to be strategic. And one of the things that I notice is that oftentimes that training on how to be strategic is missing. So for example, when you're talking about recreation and you're talking about cost recovery targets, right? Staff can write a staff report and outline here's currently what our cost recovery targets are. Here's what's offset by taxation. Here's what user fees bring in. Now, council, what should we do? And then they get to have a policy discussion about are user fees going to pay more of the facility? Or is it going to be offset by taxation? That's the fun policy work that council gets to decide, is the type of service, the level of service, and how you're going to pay for it as a community. And oftentimes those conversations around the council table are missing. They don't take place because there's an absence of good information. So it's part of the process to identify, okay, so for example, our arena was, the cost were off, cost recovery targets, I think, were at like 15%, and then the rest was covered by taxation. And once council knew that, they could look for strategies to maximize the use of the facilities and increase the user fees. But if they understand that, then they can provide the rationale out on the street of why they're doing what they're doing. And it becomes deliberate. And that's what makes policy fun and interesting. And of course, the public does not want to pay more taxes, but they want more services, right? Surprise, surprise. Who wants to pay more? But we don't talk about what we're going to give up if we don't pay more. And if you have a strategic plan that does not, and it does not look after your built environment, it is like, it's like having a plan with holes in the bucket, filling up a bucket full of water with holes all over it. It's going to drain right out. It's interesting because I'm pretty sure that this is probably the case in your communities too. What's the hot button item during elections? It's economic development, right? It's always the biggest topic. What's the community doing about economic development? And I find it interesting that nobody ever says, hey, guess what? We're doing a fantastic job in economic development. Because our job is to create the legislative environment that allows economic development to take place and to look after the built environment, and we're doing an awesome job of it. right? There's often those criticisms are lobbed at elected officials, and nobody's actually saying that local government has a huge role in economic development. But in terms of what they can control, it is the built environment and the legislative environment. Nothing beyond that. And so it's important to be able to link those strategic priorities to what council has control over, and that's the built environment and the legislative environment. So I'm just going to give you an example of a community that I worked in, and this is their strategic plan. And what they've got here is those circles beside those strategic priorities. Those are things that they can control. They've identified what they have control over and what they have influence over, right? And the last one is something that they have influence over but no control. And so all of their strategic priorities have identified where they have control. And it's all heavily focused on asset management and communication and staff capacity and providing services. I'm going to zip through. So, and I talked about this earlier, it's important to have a policy because that's how you get direction, right? It provides the direction for staff. And it allows then staff to be able to optimize the facilities that, and optimize the built environment and to determine the level of service. So we're going to talk about you get to decide in your policy, are you going to be reactive or proactive, right? Are you going to, again, a community I worked in, the staff were able to identify that 80% of their, 80% of the work that they did, the maintenance they did, was reactive, and only 20% was proactive. And the life cycle of the infrastructure wasn't maximized. So one of the things that you want to have in terms of a policy discussion with council is are we going to be reactive? Like, it should be a discussion around the table. I told you the story about the airport. You get to decide. We're going to let the airport fall apart. That's a choice that we're going to do. However, our other facilities, we're going to extend the life of the infrastructure, and that means it's going to cost this much to be able to do that. We're going to look after our pool and make sure that we maintain that level of service. And it's important for elected officials and the public to understand this because it influences the narrative during election time. And because a 0% tax increase is actually a -4, right? It's going backwards. If you're going to maintain the same level of service, you usually have to look at a 2 to 4% increase if you're going to maintain that level of service, right? And that's actually what you should be starting with on your budget. We maintain this level of service, this is what it's going to cost. Don't start with a tax percent, like a tax increase percentage. Don't start with those numbers. Because you can't talk about taxes without talking about level of service. Almost every local government, I've never worked in a local government that is, most of them, every one of them is taxing to the services they provide and often under-taxing. So then I asked you this as well. Do you have your inventory and your condition assessments? Do you have a definition for what each asset serves, right? Do you know what each asset, what it does? And just have a brief little description of what the assets are and the service they provide. And then knowing what condition they're in. And one of the things that I would say is that, like I said, you need to go to council and say, this is, in order to give you this information, this is the resources that we need. In order to have confidence in our information, we need these tools. Condition assessments should be part of, in Golden, it was part of our policy to fund condition assessments so that staff weren't having to come back and ask council every year as part of the budget process. So there was no risk of it being removed out of the budget. This is just kind of an example of, your elected, when you're communicating with your elected officials, they don't need all of the data that you have, but what they do need to know is, You know, capturing this kind of information, we've got this number of water mains, storm drains. I need to work on that slide there. Got this many kilometers of sidewalks and roads and street lights, walkways, park benches. You know, and if you think about it, so park garbage cans. So if 5 years ago, you had 10 garbage cans, and now you have 78, there's a level of service. Suddenly, there's an expectation that all those garbage cans, they're going to be emptied on a regular basis, right? So you have to recognize if you're that's another area that's often not captured. Okay, we're going to add more garbage cans, but you have to look after them. So there's a level of service. It's a change to level of service, which means you have to increase your capacity or recognize that you're increasing your capacity. If you have more benches, then there's maintenance that has to be done, right? And so this helps, you know, if you can capture this data and share this information with council, it helps them, communicate to the community. And really, if we like it this way, if you like all those things, if you like to have garbage and you like to have flowers and boulevards and trails, what is it going to take to keep it that way? So one of the, and this is just an example from our community, we did our critical assets. That was the first one where we did our inventory and condition assessments. And when we overlaid the water, sewer, and roads on top of one another, it gave us this map here and helped us identify which was in which the water and sewer that was in really poor condition. And it allowed us to identify 19 infrastructure renewal projects that totaled $15 million just on our critical assets. So, just so we're clear, a 1% tax increase in the town of Golden is $50,000. This was $15 million worth of infrastructure upgrades on our critical assets that needed to be done. So obviously a huge disconnect, right? But the cool thing about this mapping is we could go to the community and say, when 11th Street was being torn up, but 12th Street was in really poor shape, we could show people the map and say, the reason we tore up 11th Street is because the underground assets were at risk of service failure. And so if we didn't fix those, then, and I know 12th Street's in really bad shape, but the underground assets are in good shape, so we're good, right? So we're going to leave it at that. We're going to invest in the linear assets because there's a higher risk there. And so, and once you were able to explain the rationale, then the public could, instead of going, why are those stupid idiots tearing up a perfectly good street, you've got data to say this is why, right? Because guess what? They're going to hear it on the street. You might hear it too, but they're going to hear it. I don't know why those idiots are tearing up that street, right? So then in terms of policies around financial planning, I should ask everybody how they're doing. You guys doing okay? What time is it? 2:30. Ooh, we are smoking on the time. I'm going to give you we're going to do one little exercise to get your brain engaged for a couple minutes because you've been sitting for a very long time. It'll just take a moment. And this is based on empirical evidence and neuroscience, okay? So I want you to stand up. There is science behind this, neuroscience, okay? So you put your hand onto something, and I want you to lift one leg, only if you can, and start to draw a circle. All right, now make a square with your hand. How's it going? All right, now I want you to do some marching here. Can't believe I'm letting this be filmed. All right. I want you to cross your hands. Across. Okay. So you're going to go cross, cross, same arm, same leg, same arm, same leg. Cross, cross, same arm, same leg, same arm, same leg. Cross, cross, same arm, same leg, same arm, same leg. Cross, cross, same arm, same leg, same arm, same leg. Last time, cross, cross. Nice work. All right. So that's called brain gym. And so if you, in the middle of your day, are suddenly needing to access both sides of your brain, that's a really good exercise to get your brain switching back and forth. And not only do you get a little bit of blood flow, but you also just, like I said, there's science that demonstrates that that stimulates your brain in a different way, so you can sit down. Before we start talking about finances. So again, the finance department, your job is to let council know and have some policies on their overall financial position. And letting council know we don't have enough money to manage our existing assets. And this is going to be our strategy to do that, right? The same community that I was telling you about with the geothermal system, their staff was able to identify that they were currently spending $80,000 a year on road rehabilitation, but they should be spending $500,000 on road rehabilitation. So as the gap grows, it's not going to get any smaller, right? And so there has to be a strategy. How are we going to deal with the gap? Are we going to change the level of service? Is there going to be a different level of service? Are we going to increase taxes? How are you going to close the gap? That's a policy decision of council. But if they don't have the information and you're not putting those consequences before them, they can't engage in that fulsome conversation, right? So that's really, really key. So that they can answer the question, if we don't get any more money, what's going to be the impact of service? Your job is to provide that information with them, that this is going to be the long-term impact of service. And then having reserve policies, because what you don't want is spikes in your budget every year. And if you've got fulsome policies, like an equipment replacement policy, and you've got reserves, all linked to your asset management strategy, it takes the politics out of your asset management process, and then it allows it to be solely based on empirical evidence, so that council's making decisions based on empirical evidence. Evidence-based decision-making rather than decision-based evidence-making, right? So all of those, having a fulsome reserve policy to identify where resources need to come from. We even have an election reserve, so that because we went from 3 years to 4 years, and we figured that we were more likely to have some resignations in the middle of council terms. So we have a reserve so that there's no spike in the budget for by-elections. And here is the critical one that needs, like I said, needs to be in your policy. Life cycle cost accounting of all new or gifted or inherited assets. Has anyone ever offered you something for $1? Yeah, and I've heard that over and over again. And it's free to make kids, right? So it's free to maybe inherit a school. However, you have to take life cycle cost accounting, and if you want that information to be up there, you can take on those resources, but not in the absence of good information. So make sure that that's part of your policy and policy discussion. And then establishing service levels. What's currently the level of service? And your job is to kind of define, this is the level of service we're currently providing now, right? And I showed you earlier, we've got 78 garbage cans that we're now, that we're maintaining, and we're picking up garbage, right? Or we're keeping our pool open from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. This is the level of service that we provide. So defining those level of service, and then having a good understanding of what the services you're going to need in the future and what the trends are. And are your current levels of service achievable in the long run? And level of service is based on, first of all, what's the customer willing to pay for? And if they don't know what they're even paying for right now, like I did before I was elected, I didn't know what I was paying for. So defining that, and then developing a strategy that allows you to continue the same level of service. Then council can have a discussion if they're going to be changing the level of service, or if they're going to tax to the level of service, or if they're going to be using user fees to the level of service, right? So linking those two things. And of course, lots of conversation about climate change, right? Climate change is impacting a number of communities. I know one community is experiencing, because their storm drainage management system isn't prepared for the heavy rains, and so they're experiencing flooding around the community. And I know that probably many of you are aware what's going on in BC, all of the fires and floods that we experienced. I was living in Kelowna for a while, and we had a flood one week, and then fires the next. Right? So taking that into consideration and the impact, and being prepared for climate change, and making sure it's part of your policy. Now, I said this before. I said staff's job is to be risk averse. That's what your job is to do. So when you're presenting that information, make sure that it's that you're identifying what the risks and what the consequences are. And council's job is to decide the level of risk that they're willing to assume. But they won't know if they don't have that information. So in terms of risk management, do you know the risk of failure for each asset, the likelihood of failure, the criticality of failure? So the criticality of failure in a community where the water goes down, that's kind of a big deal. Whereas if a sign, as long as it's not a stop sign, if that goes down on a trail, there's less criticality, right? But also taking into consideration what the social and economic and environmental cost of failure will be. And so many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this table. The likelihood times the consequence kind of helps you identify if something is a really high risk. And I said this earlier, bringing council with some options in terms of budget reductions. We might want to maintain the same level of service in one area, but in another area, we might say we want to reduce and divest ourselves of these of assets that are not high value. And then here's the big question: do you have the organizational capacity to be able to provide this information to council? That's the key question. And if you don't, what's the consequence of that? And so making sure that you're bringing that to the elected officials. This is what our asset management process is. This is the policy that we need to look at. And these are the resources that we're going to need organizationally to get ourselves into a position so that we can give you the information so that you can make good decisions for the long-term health of the community.